So you start to think about, those kinds of energy exchange systems. Those are the kinds of things, again, with our imagination that we have to be thinking about doing in order to really solve our energy problems in the future and produce the amount of food that we need to produce. It's not going to be done. Now, and again, I want to make clear, this doesn't mean that alternative energy isn't important. We're going to need alternative energy. But we can't assume that simply by producing the alternative energy that we solve the problem. We're going to need liquid fuels for certain kinds of activities, etc. But we have to develop these, what I call biological synergies, which keeps the energy in the system and exchanged within the system, rather than flowing through the system. Are there other ideas that people have around energy that you're using on your own farm?
Well, I'll let anybody else speak to that because I was going to introduce a different topic. If I can, I wanted to kind of pick. Can you hear me okay? I wanted to introduce urban agriculture. I don't know how many people in here can make the link or tie what you're talking about to what's happening in the cities. I mean, we all know that cities are labeled as parasites in the landscape, and I think there's a lot of activity happening in the cities trying to work on those energy systems and trying to get people to collaborate together to develop resources within the city so that they have a more participatory role in the food systems as food citizens. And I'm thinking particularly there are movements around community gardens, food banks, community kitchens, all those things that don't necessarily all work together but have the potential to work together to create something bigger. And you mentioned earlier, someone talked about the link between the farmers and the consumers, and how the consumers talking to the farmers will have an impact on opening the eyes of the farmer, and the farmer has an impact on opening the eyes of the consumer. So that's something, some synergy works between that. Would you care to comment a little bit about the urban ecology in terms of agriculture and growing food?
The background noise here is a little bit. Your question at the end was what?
Could you comment, please, on how what you've been talking about has a rapport or ties into what's happening in the cities as well?
Right. I thought that's where you were going, but I wasn't quite sure of the exact question. Yeah. Well, I think that another resource that you might be interested in this regard is Julian Cribb, who's published a book called The Coming Famine. He's a science writer from Australia. And the thing I like about his book, he's one of the few people that have really looked at all of these combination of challenges that we're going to be facing. And he makes a very important point. He says that what we need to do now is keep all of our options on the table. Because he said, as we go through this transition, it's going to be important. And again, changes never come, overnight in large changes. They come in successions, and through those successions, we sort out what works and what doesn't work. And so I think that he's right about that. That we need to keep all of our options on the table. Now, we have to be careful about all of those options and not keep those options on the table that are in fact going to make the problem worse. So we have to sort those out. And to a large extent, many of those are going to get sorted out themselves because they're not going to be, we're talking about the collapse this morning that we saw. Some of those systems are simply going to collapse. But here's the important thing about it. And one of the things that Julian Cribb mentions throughout his book is that urban agriculture is going to be an important component of this mix of things as we go through these transitions. And he makes it very clear, not that he doesn't think that urban agriculture is going to feed the world, but it's going to be an important cushion in the process here. And, there's some examples of this already out there. There was an article in the New York Times about a year ago called The Uprooted Become Rooted. And it was a story to North America and the story was focused primarily, as you would expect from New York Times, on the United States, but I suspect the same thing is happening here in Canada. Pointing out that there are now a number of women who are resource-poor people who come from places like Somalia, and they come to this part of the world as refugees. And they come here, and they're farmers, and they know how to raise food, but because they're resource-poor people, they end up in resource-poor communities. And in these resource communities are food deserts. There's no food. And they look around and they see land in lawns and in other places that they know they could raise food in, and there's no food there. So they start talking to their neighbors about how they could begin to transform some of that land into gardens that they could then produce food in. And there's a map of the United States as part of that article, which has different sized circles on it. And each size circle is an indication of the number of these kinds of arrangements that have been made. And it's throughout the United States. Even in Des Moines, Iowa, there are some that have emerged like this. So again, these are things that are happening from the bottom up that do not get a lot of, and you know, you get into the New York Times, you shouldn't say anymore, the public media isn't doing this. But generally, this is not a part of our daily conversation. But this is a part of the urban gardening, a part of the urban farming, the urban agriculture. And the other thing and this is another part of the good news that I didn't have time to talk about this morning, and particularly in my involvement at the Stonebark Center just outside of New York, I run into this all the time now, is that we have, and I'm assuming you have this in Canada too, we now have this incredible group of young people who want to farm. They are amazing. I mean, they are smart, they are imaginative, they are dedicated, and they want to farm. And they don't want to raise corn and soybeans, they want to raise food for people. And, you know, we're going to have our 4th Young Farmer Conference at the Stonebark Center on the 12th and 13th of December this year. And each year, we just put it on our website and say, this is the program that we're going to have this year. And each year, we've always had at least 100 more. We have space available for about 250 young people. And each year, we always have more that want to come to the Young Farmer Conference than we have space for. This year, the space filled up in 3 hours after we put it on the website. And there are now 100 young people who are on the waiting list that are hoping somebody cancels out and can't make it so that they can come. And I have to tell you that this is one of the most inspiring times for me of everything else that happens at the Stonebark all year long. Because these young people are, and I don't want to make this, I don't want to romanticize this, because they know there are a lot of challenges and problems, many of which I mentioned this morning. And I know there are a lot of challenges and problems. I mean, they need access to land. They need access to affordable capital. They need access to the kind of markets that can give them the kind of returns so they can pay off their investment and have a decent life. That's really all they want. But this peak farmer issue is something that all of us have to be concerned about. And we have this incredible gift now of these young people, and they can't go out there and buy 5,000 acres of land in Iowa at now a little over $10,000 an acre to grow corn and soybeans, and it's just not in the picture. The capital doesn't work out for them, but they can get access, you know, to 3 or 4 or 5 or even 10 acres in an urban setting, and land's expensive, as we know, and we can, through public policy, you know, make some changes that can make, you know, capital more affordable, etc. A good example of this, in fact, again, is in North Dakota. In North Dakota, my home state, has the only state-owned bank in the United States. And because it's a state-owned bank, they were able to develop a policy a couple of years ago in which they are now making capital available, loans available to beginning farmers in North Dakota at a little below 2% interest. And that's a flat rate for the full time of that loan. The interest will not change for the full time of the loan. And that's made a big difference in terms of young people getting the capital that they need to get in. So there are a number of things that we can do in terms of public policy to address these issues. Now that gets at more around urban agriculture probably than you were envisioning, but I think it's all a part of it, because urban agriculture is a piece of that. And urban agriculture, while, as I say, I think Julian Crick's right, it's not going to feed the world, but it's going to be a very, very important piece of meeting the food system challenges that we're all going to be addressing.
I think that if we're going to be talking about a sustainable food system, that the most important allies we have are the consumers. And I've been involved in farming for near all my life, but it's only the last few years when the consumers became more knowledgeable and were asking for different things from the food system that I can see some positive results. So I'm just wondering how we can bring the consumers into that circle of people who will build a new system.
Yeah.